Spirit. Please be seated. So this morning I want to start with the question, what are some Labor Day traditions that you and your family either have today or that you used to have? Anyone? Say it loudly. Cookout. Sleeping late. I like that one. Closing down the cabin. Going to the beach? Anyone? My husband yesterday watched the Georgia game, right? College football normally starts this weekend, right? Go Bulldogs. That's for you, honey. So traditionally, we have these things that we do for Labor Day. And Labor Day became a national holiday back in 1894. While according to Google, the exact origins of that date are a bit debated, the general idea is that Labor Day was a day set aside to give thanks for the achievements that the labor force has done for the USA, along with the advancements of fair treatment of employees because of labor unions that existed in the 1800s. Early celebrations of Labor Day would include parades with the strength and the number of those labor unions on full display. And then they would be followed up with picnics that offered a place for public address and fundraising for labor unions. So how do the celebrations that we have today for Labor Day connect with the original intentions of the Labor Day holiday? Of course, many of our traditions and rituals change over time, and that's not always a bad thing. But it is worth taking some time to reflect and examine both the origins of a tradition along with where it is at presently, what its current reality is. Have our traditions become irrelevant, or worse, have in some way they begun to hinder whatever the original purpose of that tradition or ritual was? This is one way of viewing the gospel that we've read today. Simply asking, why do we do what we do? And how does it impact our relationships? Our own personal relationships with God, our neighbors' relationships with God, and our relationships one with another, both in this space and in the world at large. How do our relationships get impacted by our rituals? So today we have returned to the gospel according to Mark. This dialogue that we hear today takes place shortly after Jesus sends off the 2 by 2 disciples, and then the feeding of the 5,000, which follows by the calming of the sea at night. If you remember, all of that happened in July for us. But then in August, we took that long tangential bread discourse as we were in the Gospel of John for the month. The verse preceding today's reading tells of Jesus' growing popularity. It says, "And wherever he went, into villages or cities or farms, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak. And all who touched it were healed." It is then that Jesus has this run-in with the religious leaders, some coming all the way from Jerusalem to confront Jesus and his disciples. I suspect that they are concerned with more than just the traditions of a few purity practices, but they confront Jesus with whatever is easily accessible at that moment. Of course, they grossly overstate the practice of hand washing and utensil cleansing. While it was the tradition that some upheld, it was certainly not a tradition upheld by all Jewish people. Nor was it actually a Mosaic law. I mean, could you imagine having to wash the hands of 5,000 people before they were fed the fish and the loaves? Probably wasn't going to happen. Most likely, this purity practice was a morphing of a law that required priests to properly cleanse themselves before performing priestly duties. But over time, it changed. They used the argument that since Jewish people were set apart to be a priestly nation, then all of those priestly laws should apply to all people at all times. But again, while some took and applied this law in such a way, many, if not most of the Jews themselves did not practice these types of ritual cleansing before eating. And yet here we are. The leaders place these expectations on Jesus' disciples and judge them when those expectations are not being met. Jesus is not saying that these traditions and practices that the Pharisees follow are bad, but he is saying that when the heart of the matter is examined, it appears like these chosen practices have become tools to separate and to alienate, instead of achieving what the purpose of Mosaic law was for, which was to connect and to maintain relationships with God and with neighbor. Jesus then teaches it's the status of our hearts that really matters at the end of the day. The heart being the center of human will, rationality, and desire, the place where intentions originate. A good or a bad heart can make all the difference. Jesus indicates that having a heart distanced or far from God leads to an unhealthy or a bad heart, and that bad heart produces actions and behaviors that will lead to destruction. A subtle analysis that Jesus makes is in regards to one's response to the marketplace. The marketplace is mentioned here 2 times within just 5 verses. First, in the telling of Jesus healing many who were brought to him in the marketplace. And then secondly, when the Pharisees and the scribes point out that Jesus' crew did not participate in what they thought were the necessary post-marketplace cleansing. There are 2 very different attitudes regarding the marketplace here. One, I would say, is the attitude of the soft heart that sees the marketplace as a place of great need, but also opportunity for great healing, opportunity for the inbreaking of God's kingdom. That's one way to view the marketplace. Or you could view the marketplace with a hard heart. A hard heart would see the marketplace as nothing but a dirty place, causing nothing but impurity and demanding serious cleansing after you've engaged with it. So, what is the marketplace? Is it a place of kingdom potential for healing and love, or is it a place of defilement? Which heart do we want to have? Jesus suggests that in this case, the religious leaders get so caught up in their tradition that they lose sight of what really matters, the real needs that lay right there in front of them. Where are the hearts of the religious leaders if they can't see what God is showing as the possibilities right there in front of them in the marketplace? This gospel reading in part invites us to evaluate our traditions and our practices, to see if they alienate and separate, or if instead they engage with God and support good relationships and lead to places of healing and health. Practices are good if they help to soften our hearts, to align them with God's will, and to respond to the world in ways that mirror God's heart. The gospel reading also invites us to examine our own hearts. None of our hearts are pure, and sometimes the dark side can get the better of us. But we are equally not without hope. God can and does help us to have and maintain a healthy heart. But it takes awareness, intentionality, prayer, and guidance to keep our hearts healthy. We must work at it, not just assume it's all good. When we hold on to practices, traditions, and rituals, it's important to ask if a particular practice is good or bad for our heart. Similarly, I need to ask, is that chocolate cake I had last night good or bad for my heart? Does it soften our hearts, making us more aware of God's opportunities? Or does it harden our hearts, distancing us further from God's will? God has designed us for community, and practices and traditions of that community should be ones that offer inclusion, connecting with God and neighbor. Thus, it's important to examine what is at the heart of our beloved traditions. Part of doing this is to offer regular heart examinations, to check to make sure our heart hasn't turned hard and still beats in rhythm with God's. So while we are in this season of listening and learning here at Iona Hope, I think it might be helpful for us to reflect on the rituals and the practices that we have established or that we've incorporated into our practice as Episcopalians. Practices both that happen in this space, but then also in all of our ministries, all of the ways that we collectively engage with our community. To examine what's beneath the surface, what's aiding in our worship and shaping our prayerful responses to bring God's kingdom here and now. And then also to examine what is possibly getting in the way of relationships. What's getting in the way of our own relationships with God? What's getting in the way of our relationships one with another? What's getting in the way of relationships with our neighbors outside these walls? And what's getting in the way of their relationships with God? May all that we do be to the glory of God. Amen.